Welcome to the CMO Spotlight, and I'm so thrilled today to have the co-founder of the company Reebok, Mr. Joe Foster. Thank you so much for being with me, Mr. Foster.
Thank you, Joe. It's, I'm delighted. It's great to have a conversation with you.
Thank you so much. So I want to start with you actually co-founded this company in 1958 with your brother, who unfortunately has passed away a long time ago. But Reebok was founded in 1958, and then Rebound branded to the name Reebok in 1960. So I wonder if we could just begin by your telling a little bit about the origin story of Reebok and how it came to be.
Well, the origin story, really, if you want the origin, goes really back to my grandfather. My grandfather, he set up J.W. Foster, which became J.W. Foster and Sons Athletic Shoes, when it became a limited company. He set that up in 1895 when he invented the spike running shoe. Unfortunately, he died in 1933. I was born in 1935, but I was born on his birthday. So my grandmother, I became the favorite grandson, of course, because and she said, well, you brought your name with you. Or she said to mother, he's brought his name with him, and that was it. I don't think my mother really would have called me Joe, but she had to. She's absolutely scared stiff of grandma. So grandma got her way, and I became Joseph William, just like my grandfather. However, by that time, of course, his two sons, my father and uncle, had taken over the company. But they didn't seem to have the same enterprise or the same interest that he had. And when eventually Jeff and myself came into the company, we came into a company that was doing the same product it was doing in the 1930s. So they hadn't moved on. And Jeff and myself, we did 2 years of national service. Jeff went in the Army, I went in the RAF. We came back after 2 years. And of course, we were slightly different people. We learned a bit about self-sufficiency, doing things. Mother wasn't there, father wasn't there, so you had to think a bit for yourself. And when we came back to a failing company. The J.W. Foster company was failing. My father and uncle, they just fought. They didn't talk to each other. They just shouted at each other if ever they spoke to each other. And just like Addie Dassler and Rudy Dassler, they fought each other. But Rudy had the good sense to leave and set up Puma, whereas the Foster family, my father and uncle, just kept feuding. And the problem with that, of course, is the company started to fail. So although I spoke to my father quite a few times and said, come on, Dad, we need to do something, all he could say is, look, Joe, when I'm gone and your uncle's gone, this company will be yours. You can do what you like. And I said, look, Dad, we don't want you to go. That's not the thought behind this. We don't want you to go, but this company will be gone long before you're gone. And in fact, it did happen that way. So we, in 1958, Jeff and myself, we'd gone to college for night school, college, and we learned a lot more about footwear. And we thought, right, now we can set up our own company. So in 1958, we left the family business, if you will, and we set up our own company. And we did set it up as Mercury Sports Footwear. And then we encountered our first problem 18 months later when somebody said, you got to register the name. We found out we couldn't. So we had a new name. And there's quite a story to the new name. And if you've read the book, you probably get the story fully. But that would take the whole of a half hour to tell. But so it's a good story. But we changed to Reebok. And that's how we started with the Reebok name.
Excellent. And so at this point, the company was you and your brother kind of running it. And what was the scale and scope of the company at this point? I mean, were you just selling in the UK? At what point did it become what you would call kind of the more modern version of Reebok that we all know, as a pretty well-known global entity?
Yeah, well, I guess really you've got to go back to thinking about 1960 and what the world was like at that point. We didn't have computers. We didn't have smartphones. The only way to contact between the UK and America was a transatlantic cable. Or you wrote a letter, which meant it took 14 days to get an answer to any questions, and meeting people, impossible. So we developed our company in the UK. We looked for what we call white space because Adidas were a big company. They had come into the UK. They had taken over soccer, and soccer was the big sport, if you will, in the UK at that time. Probably still is the biggest sport. But to get into it would have cost us far too much money. So we had to look for little spaces where either Adidas, too small for Adidas, or they hadn't even heard of it. So we looked across country for orienteering, different things. We had even rugby league. Rugby league was a small sort of league in the north of England. It's a bit bigger now, but in the north of England. So we could knock on doors, we could go direct. And we built our company in the UK. We also, I went around to sports retailers. In those days, sports retailers were ex-footballers, ex-sportsmen who just opened a small store and they sold everything. So I used to try and get my shoes in there, and I would go in and they'd look at me and say, well, that's a nice product, that. But look, I've got Adidas and I've got Dunlop. Why do I need Reebok? And that was the big question. I came across that question 3 or 4 times. Why do I need Reebok? And I realized they didn't need Reebok. So that started the thinking, well, what's the alternative? Well, we used to go to race meetings and sell out of the back of the car. And the 3 A's, they produced a handbook. The 3 A's were the Amateur Athletic Association, because in those days it was all amateurs. And their handbook had about 400 different running clubs throughout the country, all part of track and field. And there was the name and address of the secretary. So it was direct selling. I wrote a letter to the secretaries and invited somebody in the club to become an agent. I give them a discount. And my first letter, I got 100 agents. Great. Wow. I followed this up and eventually I got over 200 agents. So we were direct selling. And then, of course, the sports stores started ringing me and saying, you're supplying our local athletic club. If you stop doing that, we'll stock your product. And yes. And I said, look, if you stock the product, you can become part of our advertising. We will advertise your name. Plus, you get it at wholesale price, which is less than half the retail. These guys are only getting 15%. And I said, I'm sure you give 15% to your local athletics clubs and whoever else you supply. But I said, I'm not stopping selling direct. I'm not stopping that. We want that, but they can go to you. About 90% of the retailers accepted that. And that was great. And we got to the point where we probably owned the running business in the UK. And then it was a question, we sit down there, where do we go next? Do we increase our offering? Do we go into soccer? Or do we increase our territory and go into Europe or go into America? Europe is 28 nations and as many languages and different cultures. America, yeah, there are some languages, there are some culture changes, but nearly everybody spoke English. Certainly everybody understood English. So, and that was a big market, 350 million Americans with a disposable income 10 times that of anybody in Europe. So, but of course the founder said, it's too expensive to go to America. It's a hell of a long way. And how do we afford that? Well, much to our surprise and our luck, if you will, the government, the British government, were advertising that they wanted us to export. They were advertising in Eurosport, a magazine, and they wanted us to they wanted us to export. They said they would pay our airfare. They would pay for a stand at the NSGA show in Chicago, which is the National Sporting Goods of America. Big show in America. Yeah. Unfortunately, it was in February. February and Chicago go together like.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And so there was no objection to me going. They also said they'd pay half of the hotel bill as well. So I started that in 1968, my first trip. Great. Everybody loved the shoes, but I didn't sell anything because nobody wanted to import. There was, how do you import? But I met a few people. However, I didn't get into the American market until 1979. But luck was on our side because although I was pushing and I had six failed attempts with people in America, I met enough people, and it took me 11 years. But you've got to think, we didn't have computers. We didn't have the communication we have today. So really, I only get 11 attempts to meet people, which when you put it down is, it's a few to get the right one, but we got the right one in 1979, mainly because running during the 70s just became the biggest category in America.
Right.
Everybody wanted to go running. Everybody wanted a pair of running shoes, and it was simple. To belong to a sport, all you need is a pair of shoes and a pair of shorts. Cheap enough. You know, it's not cycling where you need a bike, and you don't need to belong to a football club. You can go out and you can run. So that was the way we got into America, was because of the growth of the sport. And Runner's World was a magazine that grew with the sport, grew into a big magazine, 50, 60 color pages. And Bob Anderson, well, he thought he was a king, and he probably wasn't at that time, because he told everybody what shoe to buy, which was the best running shoe. And of course it was Nike. Nike was first. Unfortunately, Phil Knight, the problem was he was bringing the product in from Asia. And when Bob Anderson said Nike's the #1 shoe, and you've got probably 30 million Americans running and reading his magazine, the demand just outstripped the possibility for supply.
Right.
Yeah.
So it opened up other options from other manufacturers such as Reebok to fill that void, right?
Well, I mean, the void was being filled by a lot of people, be it New Balance, Etonic, and a few other products out there. It's just that and I think a lot of us are impressed if someone says that's the best shoe on the market.
Mm-hmm.
So that just changed the demand to be Nike, and everybody wanted a Nike shoe. And the year after, I think he changed it from Nike. I think he said New Balance. New Balance was the same. You couldn't get the production level up. So in his third year, he decided, instead of who's #1, he changed it to star ratings. So if you had he rated you as 5 stars, then you would be in demand. And that meant we could have 4 or 5 shoes having 5 stars. And that's what happened with Reebok. We actually got 3 5-star shoes in the 1979 the shoe edition of Runner's World, and that changed it. We had credentials. All of a sudden, we had credentials. So the demand came, and Reebok made its way into America. And
you implied that the Nikes and even maybe New Balance were sourced in Asia, but was that different for where was the Reebok shoe sourced from?
Now that wasn't different for Reebok, but if you can think about it, Nike, you say Nike is #1, all the demand goes there. You got 5.
Right. It was just the concentration of demand just outstripped the production, regardless of where it was being done.
Absolutely, it was just crazy, and
so
that's how we got it.
I'm curious. Then, obviously, the Reebok brand, persisted for a long time, and it made a transition at a certain point into other sports. And I know that it got extremely well known for aerobics and then basketball and some other sports as well. So talk about the transition. So I guess once you built the name in the running category, then how did that transition happen from running into some of the other categories?
Well, whilst we now have demand from the running fraternity, and we're supplying quite nicely, we have a guy down in Los Angeles called Angel Martinez, and his wife Frankie. She's going to these classes, coming back, and she's going with her friends or girlfriends, and they're coming back, and they're absolutely full of this. Wow! And Angel said, "Frankie, what are you doing?" And she said, "Well, we're doing aerobics," and of course, Arnold said, "What's aerobics?" What is aerobics? And she said, "Well, we're exercising to music." Oh. Arnold went to the next class, saw the instructor wearing a pair of sneakers. We do think they were New Balance at the time, but they were a pair of white sneakers. Half the class were wearing the same sneaker, the other half just in bare feet. And so Arnold, that was his light bulb moment, whatever you want to call it. He thought, why don't we make a shoe specifically for aerobics? Make it on a woman's last, make it in women's sizes, and make it in glove leather. So it fits like a glove. It's so comfortable. Arnold is in Los Angeles. CEO of America, of course, is Paul Feynman. Paul Feynman's in Boston. So Arnold took the overnight red eye, got to Boston, and confronted Paul. And Paul said to Arnold, "Arnold, slow down. Slow down."
Right. He was excited.
Yeah, we're a running company. Why do we want to be making dancing shoes for girls? Hmm. The conversation went on, but Arnold wasn't so satisfied, so he went round to the back door. We were not that big in those days. Went round to the back door and saw Steve Liggett. Steve Liggett was our product man, and he did a better job with Steve. He persuaded him to get him 200 pairs of the shoe that he told him he wanted, which he got. Gave it to the instructors and some of the leading girls down there, and it just took off. They loved them. Fantastic. Problem is, they were made in glove leather, and glove leather didn't last for longer than half a dozen exercises, and that was falling apart. Had that happened in any other part of the world apart from LA and America, I think Reebok would have never made it. We'd have been cast aside. Certainly in Europe, they would never have tolerated that. We eventually got that right, but the girls loved them so much they just went out and bought another pair. And then when Jane Fonda actually bought a pair and used them in her videos, that was it. We just took off. And that's when we needed production. We
Right.
needed production badly. And fortunately for us, Nike just hit a wall. They got too much inventory and they had to pull out about 3 or 4 factories in Korea just when we needed it. And we moved straight in. So, we needed funding, we needed product. Product was the biggest problem. Funding we could get, but product that was really the big one. And we went from a $9 million running company to a $900 million women's
Wow.
company. We
And
pivot.
what years what was this happening ish?
We're talking 84, 85.
84 or 5. Okay, wow. So talk about 10x the revenue of the company, which also meant the people and the infrastructure and all of the systems and all of it, right?
Yes. And
Wow.
then that was a fantastic job that Paul Feynman did, and his team. We had a great team in America. I'm in the UK and I'm looking after global. I just
Right.
look at, and but yeah, I mean we just hit it just at the right time.
And I'm assuming then even some of the running shoes and the aerobics shoes then got exported around the world, maybe back to Europe, where it was catching on. Aerobics was probably catching on as a craze globally, right?
Well, I have mentioned the NSGA show that we were invited
Yeah.
to go to by the government. That was the biggest global sports goods exhibition in the world. And everybody from global went to that. And I met a lot of people who were from Japan, from Europe, wherever. They all went to see what is new in America. And so the good thing for me, and I used to say to Paul, concentrate on America. Just as much as you can. I'll do the rest. But I didn't need to do an awful lot because everybody is coming to America, seeing the latest. The latest is Reebok. The latest is aerobics. And it just developed. I could pick up anybody then around the world to be a distributor. They all wanted to be a distributor. So again, it was just sorting out who's going to be the best guy.
Very cool. All right, so I want to shift gears a little bit and just ask you some questions that are not specific to Reebok. I'm
Right.
curious if there's a piece of advice that either you wish that you'd gotten early in your career, or maybe you would give to somebody that's starting out in their business career, or maybe even a marketing career, since we're kind of focused on marketing. What's the piece of advice either you wish you'd gotten or you would give to somebody young in their career?
Well, I mean, the problem about that is that in 1950, the whole scene has changed now to in 2020, 2024. I would say make sure you know whatever business you're going into, make sure you know it all from A to Z. Make sure you know it. And then once you know it, it is a question of saying, do you need a brand? Do you need a name? So you need a name. You need one that is attractive, one that's easy. And I must admit that Reebok was easier than Mercury. Reebok came across, so we got a good name there. And then you need to know how you're going to influence the market, because we're talking about marketing now. Well, what influences the market? Influencers influence the market. And
Right.
that's where we all go
In
these
those
days.
days, your aerobics instructors and then ultimately Jane Fonda were huge influencers for your brand in the 80s, for sure.
Yes. And of course, that went on as we went into basketballs, Shaq O'Neal and Iverson. And would you believe it? They're back in the company now as
Wow,
president and vice president of basketball, back into Reebok, and
wow,
they're going to make a difference. They really are going to make a
that's
difference.
cool. That's
Yeah.
really cool. Okay, so I'm curious. I believe that everybody has a superpower, and I'm curious what you feel your superpower is.
If there is such a thing, listening to people, and you whatever you do, whatever you set up, you can't be the only one that knows it all. You don't know it all. In fact, I can still look at Reebok and I can see that the silhouette is my silhouette. That's what I did. The Road Star, which was one of our logos, was something I did. But you get 2 or 3 opportunities to do things, and then you need a lot of other people. You need people who want to be in love with your brand.
Mm,
And that's the good thing about making a brand. You can own a brand. You know, my grandfather called his business after his name, J.W. Foster. Well, that's all right, but he died, and his sons also passed away. Sometimes a name will make it. We can say Foster's for beer in Australia. We can say
mhm,
Ford for cars. It sometimes make it. But if you can get a brand, that brand will be there for a long time. Can be there.
mhm,
It's the right
mhm,
people, and you need the right people uh, to I would say to really take the business the way we did from almost 0 to 1 billion. Paul Fireman needed to be hungry. He needed to want that business. And so you've got to want something. And you can only do that if you're enjoying it. And Stephen Rubin financed it. You probably know JD Sports now. JD Sports, that's really part of Stephen Rubin's empire.
mm.
He has a big empire now, but he just gave us a credit line out of Korea. And of course, a credit line is like, how much money do you want?
Yeah,
And that worked tremendously. It did.
yeah. Well, yeah, you were in a very cash intensive business that required capital to produce the product and get the product to the people that were wanting to buy it. So that was a hugely important piece of the puzzle, I think.
Which it was. Yes.
I,
Yes.
I'm curious if there are some values that you always wanted to demonstrate to your team, or are there values that you would require for anybody to be a part of the team?
I think, yes, the most important thing was I didn't like egos. Uh, yeah, team, there's no I in team. You've got to be a team, and everybody has to put in. And also, the team needs to share. People need to share. I needed to share. You've got to share everything so that you're not a boss. You just happen to be in a different position than somebody else. And it's good to listen to people. It's good to give them the power to do things. And yeah,
Mhm,
I mean, the one thing I learned and was told many times is, when you're the boss of the company, you shouldn't have a job.
mhm. Right,
If
right.
you get a job that distracts you from what's going on, you should be there to listen to people, help people. If people have got to make a decision, make a decision. If it's the wrong one, let's change it. Let's talk about it. So be in that position where you can help. Listen to people. So listening to people is very, very important, and making sure that they share the energy. They share that pleasure, that fun of being
Mhm,
part of a company, and so we developed a winning culture, which I suppose is easy to do in a product-based company, and particularly a product-based company, which is in sport. We can identify the winning quite easy, and so people who join the company love the company. And Shaq O'Neal now, he's actually 15% I think of ABG who've just bought the company from
wow.
Adidas.
Yeah,
He
right.
owns 15%, but he loves the brand.
Well, he
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 just
lives here in Atlanta, where I am, in Atlanta,
right.
Georgia. So he pops up around town periodically. That's amazing that he's a part of it again. And to your point, I think it will have an impact.
Oh yes, I think so. I
Yeah.
think it's a big impact. Plus, one of the other things I would say to anybody, find out what your story is. You must have a story. Stories will build your brand these days, and and always refer to the brand. Very few people knew Joe Foster. I'm getting known more now because of writing the book, but we always say no. This is Reebok. Everything is Reebok, and that way you're not diverting the attention.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny. So my company set up, we're matchmakers connecting marketing agencies and brands and marketing agencies together. And I knew at the very beginning, I didn't want it to be the Joe Koufman consultancy. I knew I was building
Yes.
a company and not a consultancy of with my name and with me being the core of it. And so because we often bring together brands and marketing agencies, we're not on the client side living on the brand side, and we're not an agency. We're the facilitator that brings the two together. So
Right.
we think a lot about that relationship between brands and marketing agencies. And so I'm curious just what your experience has been with working with marketing agencies over your time at Reebok. Were they instrumental in the growth of the brand and the growth of Reebok over the years?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I mean, it is. It's important. Again, you change people's minds. You get new people in with a different mindset. If you have 10 people in your marketing, you only get whatever 10 people could think about. You need hundreds.
Yeah.
Like design these hundreds. Your designer thinks along a path. You find he designs a shoe, then all the other shoes take on parts of that shoe, and they almost become the same. Whereas
Hmm.
if you have lots of different designers, they bring in different ideas all the time, and that innovation has to be there. And innovation, there are not many innovations that actually work and come out. But something like pump for Reebok,
Right.
everybody everybody recognized pump, and that was what it did. Technically, we don't really know, but
Right, right,
marketing wise, it was an absolute sensation.
right,
Everybody loved D Brown bending down, pumping up his shoes, and then dunking
right.
them. Everybody, and then bending down and releasing it
Well,
again.
I think conceptually the idea was it was supposed to improve the fit, right? Like, by
Yes,
pumping the
yes,
shoe a little bit, your fit would
right.
be better, which gave you better agility, But to your point, it was exciting for somebody to be able to physically do something that enhanced their performance just a little bit.
Yes. So we can sell the idea, but the absolute action of wearing them, that was a marketing coup that
Yeah.
really was big for marketing.
Were there certain marketing functions that you felt should always stay within the Reebok company, and then there's certain other marketing functions that you really felt you benefited more from getting the external perspective? Like, sometimes people feel they need to own the brand attributes in-house, but then there's, buying paid media or doing specific functions should live outside. Were there certain functions like that for you that you felt should be internal versus external?
Um, I not really. I always thought that any promotion is good promotion for a company, and you can pick it up
Mm.
wherever you pick it up. And like I say, there's no such thing as bad publicity. Well, it all depends. When Jeff and I started the company and we developed the company, we thought, well, we're making shoes. That's all right. We won't have any problems, or they'll only be small. Okay, so we had to change our name. Then 4 years in, Adidas wrote a letter to say our existing striping, the, there were two stripes and a T-bar. That infringed. There were three. They said that infringed, and we were not that big, but we realized just a minute. Adidas realized we're here. Adidas,
Right, right,
we're a small company already. Adidas. So we do. Oh, we'll change our silhouette. So we changed our silhouette into the Vector, and that was a better silhouette than the two stripes and the T-bar.
right, right, right.
So we learned, and we came across this many times, that what seems to be a challenge or what seems to be a problem is an opportunity. And again, anybody who's starting off in a business, don't think you won't get challenges. There will be lots of challenges, but think of them as opportunities,
Yes.
because that way you can turn it around. We turn things around. Anybody who would really say bad things about the company, we made it a point of getting in touch, of
Yeah.
communicating with them, because if they were happy enough or they were confident enough to call us names or to say how bad we were, we thought that if we could turn them around, they'd be the best people to say how good we were.
Right, 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 right. Become from a detractor to an advocate. That's a more powerful than if they just were started as an advocate.
Yeah, so we always we always relished the idea of picking up with people who didn't particularly like us for whatever reason, and we like to take them to task and say, what can we do for you? How can we
Yeah.
improve? You tell us. Yeah, and then we do something, and my word, they would tell everybody then how good we are.
Right. Well, they're then invested in the success or the turnaround from the fault or whatever that they saw. That they're invested in the return, and the fix.
Oh yeah, and I'd be so pleased that we'd bothered to speak to them. We didn't
Yeah,
ignore them.
right,
We did.
right.
It made them even more excited to become part of, and it was always good.
That's great. So I'm curious if there was a campaign or a program that taught you and the team a valuable lesson, either because it was a miserable flop that taught you that something that you needed to learn,
Yeah.
or it was a huge success that you thought, you know what, I want to try to duplicate and emulate this again in the future.
I think the thing for me was you will get knocked back a lot of times. You will find that life do, but what you have to have, I don't know whether it's just dumbness or it's brilliance or what it is, but just keep going.
Hmm.
Just keep going. And we have that now as a golden nugget. Just keep going, because you will turn the corner. The opportunities come by, and if you're still going, that opportunity will come. As with aerobics, we were still going, and aerobics arrived. That was our white space. That was the biggest white space that we could ever
Yeah.
find. And
But also as aerobics, eventually waned in popularity, and then you emerged into some other fields as well, like basketball is a good example, I think, perhaps. But
yes,
you know, so how do you pivot and change? So you were running Spike's shoe company, and then you were an aerobics company, and then you're a basketball shoe company. How do you make that pivot? When do you know when it's time to switch?
well, I think we worried about aerobics for quite some time. We thought, yeah, Adidas, they hadn't gone in there. Nike hadn't gone in there because they didn't trust women. They didn't
Mm,
trust that, because men are the usual ones that really willing to pay sport and kill themselves or injure themselves, do whatever. Women like to, use it. Okay, women are now competing and participating in more sports than ever. But well, as you can imagine, we went from 9 million to 900 million. That gave us money, and
right.
that gave us visibility.
Yeah.
And then the men wanted to get into Reeboks because we made it specifically for women. And that
Mm,
nice soft leather, we changed from glove leather to more of like a soft garment leather. That now drives the sporting goods industry. Everybody wants this nice feel. You don't need to break your shoes in. You put them on, they're comfortable.
mm,
So Reebok brought that comfort. Now it's how, what do? I think we moved first of all to tennis, because with tennis, yeah, it's easier. And a tennis shoe can go to street, and everything started going to street. So everybody became a fashion company. But we moved. Yeah,
When
now we
you
look.
say go to street, you mean not being purely worn for sport, but being worn just around, running errands and walking the dog and other things.
That's
Is
where the
that?
volume is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the volume. That's what people do. People travel. I remember that was it the Rob Strasser of Nike, when he was traveling, he thought that we'd absolutely blown Nike apart, because when he was traveling, everybody was wearing Reebok to travel in,
Mm,
and he could see Reeboks all over. He just thought they were, Reebok have just torn us apart, sort of thing, because we went street. We were happy
yeah.
to be more casual, but then you drive that by performance. So you drive that by having performance going into basketball and going into American football. So we we became a full-blooded sports
Right.
company. From our first start as just a running company, then we got known as a women's company with aerobics, and then you get into performance. But also when we started to use A-listers from Hollywood. We did a lot of things with Hollywood, and also with musicians. I think we're bringing 50 cents back in now, and
Hmm.
these things, we're bringing people in because we were happy not just to be with sports performance people, but any performance person. People
Hey,
looked up to performance people. They were our influencers. So we moved anywhere with wherever influencer and lifestyle. We became a lifestyle. So, you know, when we looked around, we could see these spaces and moved into them. So, you know, I think it used to be called make a difference. Well, make a difference is one way, but with white space can be can make a difference anywhere, wherever you can be just that bit different. You know, take that path. So, yeah, I think we became the first lifestyle company. Both Nike and
Love that.
Adidas were very keen on performance.
I love it. Well, so Mr. Foster, I want to wrap it up with a couple of kind of quick hitting questions just for fun that
Okay.
are not related to marketing necessarily or specifically to Reebok. So the first is I'm wondering if there's a quote or a movie or a book or a sports team or a band that inspires you, and what is it about that thing that inspires you?
Oh, yeah. What inspires me? Well, I suppose it's more people. I mean, it's like a mentor. Winston Churchill. He inspired me. And there's actually a statue, which is the best statue I've ever seen in the world, of Winston Churchill in Paris. And he's in his army greatcoat with his cap on, just leaning forward with the strap line, "We shall never surrender." And you know what he went through. I don't know if you've read any of his books, but it's a good book because he always took risks. He took a lot of risks in life, and I think that's what probably inspired me. Yeah, just take a risk,
I
and you
love it.
know if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But if you don't take it, you'll never know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. I know you took a lot of risks with Reebok over the years, and they seem to have worked out in the long term for you. I'm curious if outside of your family, which is an obvious answer to the question, where do you find joy outside of work? Did you have any hobbies or other things that you love to do, you know, when you're not working that stimulate you?
Oh, well, I love to do many things, read a book, do a jigsaw, those sort of things. But we are now so busy that Julie and I just travel. And we travel is one of the best hobbies that we have, and traveling and meeting people. And in fact, writing another book now. We've just finished another book, which is How to Survive and Thrive. And this tells stories. Amanda Holyfield is in there, Evander Holyfield. We've got Keith Chapman, who invented Bob the Builder
Hmm.
and Paw Patrol, and their stories are fascinating. And
Wow.
we have a lot of other fascinating stories. People, you can't believe what they've been through. What they have been through is incredible. So
Yeah,
that's how, and we're on our second book now. So that's going to be a series of books of people who survived and thrived, and
I
the
love
story
that.
is
So
incredible.
what is a destination that you haven't yet traveled to that you would love to see? And what's the most surprising place that you've already traveled that you know that you weren't expecting but surprised you?
Well, the place I would have liked to have gone to was St. Petersburg, but that's off the map these days,
Mm, yeah.
because I do believe there's a lot
Not
of
St. Petersburg, Florida, but St. Petersburg, Russia.
yes, yeah. Or, not far, but I think it's the one in Russia. Yeah, that would be a place. I, we get to Florida quite a lot, so we'll probably look at St. Petersburg there. Yes. What surprised me more? Oh, I mean, a lot of things surprised us. I suppose it's many years ago when I went to Italy and I met up with well, a guy who became the distributor many years ago, Umberto Colombo, and he took me to a place called Sacramonte, which is a mountain just outside of Varese, which is north of Milan. And it was incredibly peaceful.
Hmm.
And you could sit there just having a nice glass of wine, and you overlooked about 5 different lakes
Mm.
in in the north of Italy. And those sort of places just to go to and say, "Wow, this is it. This is nice." You could just sit down there, and you know it's a pity that you've got to come down off the mountain and get back
Right, right. Well,
back
well,
into life.
you that sounds like a kind of place that you could absolutely recharge if you're, you know, you have been extremely busy with business and you need to recharge, right, and rejuvenate
Yes.
yourself. I'm curious if there's a brand that you really admire, you know, not a Reebok brand, but another brand. And it doesn't have to be certainly not a even a sporting goods brand necessarily, but is there a brand that you really admire, and what do you admire most about that brand?
Well, I think if we could probably go into Porsche. I admire Porsche. I think that they have delivered and continue. In fact, we were in Stuttgart. We were in Stuttgart about probably 12 months ago, and we got a tour of the 911 factory, which is we were very privileged because they don't let people in there normally.
Hmm.
But they took our telephones off us before we went in, so we couldn't take any photographs. But it
Wow.
was so interesting to see, and each one of the cars going through is being specifically made for somebody,
Mm,
wherever it is around the world.
wow.
And there was still a lot of hand making. It wasn't just robots. A couple of robots. I think that's all they had. I think one put the screen on, or the glue for the windscreen. I think, and I forget what the other one was doing, but otherwise all handmade. So
Wow. Wow.
you see where the money is in that sort of
It's
manufacture.
beautiful though. You know, there's still a place for craftsmanship, it sounds like.
Oh, indeed, yes. I think there
Yeah.
is. And as I said earlier, a story.
Yeah.
A
Well,
story is good.
Mr. Foster, Joe Foster is the founder of Reebok with his brother Jeff in 1958 and then rebranded in 1960. I'm wondering if you can also tell us where we can get listeners could get your book if they want to read the book, and what's the best place for them to go to
The
learn
best
more
and
about you?
easiest place is Amazon. Go to Amazon,
Amazon.
Shoemaker, and even the new one, which is How to Survive and Thrive, that is also on Amazon. And
Excellent. So looking for Joe Foster and Shoemaker and How
yeah,
to Survive and Thrive on Amazon.
absolutely. Yes, thank you for that. Yes.
Excellent. Well, Mr. Foster, thank you so much for this time. It's been such a joy to have this conversation with you.
It's a pleasure. And yeah, we're over in America in, I think, April. We're over there in April. We've at least 3 trips coming through to America. And we'll be going to see the Reebok headquarters in Boston, as well as many other good things. So yes,
Wonderful.
been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Foster.
Thank you then.